All right, got myself kicked out in the middle of the prayer. So let's just say, Jesus, we're grateful, and we thank you for everything you're doing for us and for the way that you love us. In your name we pray. Amen. So Gary, before my technical issues cause us even more problems, why don't you
Let's,
take it away?
all right, let's dig in. Okay. Well, hey, we're just so thankful for Jonathan and the work you do and helping us help facilitating these webinars. And um, so we've been focusing on this whole idea of sharpening our edges and as leaders. And so we've journeyed through a number of issues. First, we looked at the leader's edge, three issues, real personal development and capturing God's vision, learning how to listen to God, and then vision casting, how to communicate vision effectively. And those are things we're always working on. We're always sharpening the edge. One of the things that we need to always consider is we never melt the axe head. There are people who are, I think, there's some people who like to deconstruct everything. And then there's people who like to tweak things. And I think most of us are in that realm where we don't need to deconstruct everything. Maybe we need to tweak them. Maybe we need to, really, that the axe really dull, and maybe we need to really do some heavy work on sharpening it and getting it ready to be useful again. But we don't need to melt the axe head. We just need to sharpen its edges. And so whether that's your own personal edges in your life, or what God's dealing with you on, or your team. And so the next category we looked at was your team's edge, and how to create vision ownership, how to equip your leaders, how to delegate effectively, how to coach your leaders, and then how to build a team around you to maximize your impact. And so now we're looking at the overall organizational edge. And so last time we talked about fundraising, and now we're going to be talking about hiring staff, expanding your team, moving from a volunteer base, to now more of an employee base, where people are going to give their full time, full effort, full focus onto a different area of ministry. And so we're going to take a look at that today. That's going to be as we walk through that. And then the next week, our next webinar will be on how to how to inspire your staff, how to keep them motivated and moving forward. So I love this verse out of Proverbs. It's wisdom literature. Like an archer who wounds at random is he who hires a fool or any passerby. And hiring is really an art form, and so you do all the work. We're going to talk about a lot of work in the hiring process and the different stages and key steps you need to take to do that well. And so it's a lot of work, but it's an art too. It's an art form. And so I've been hiring people for 25 years, and some, I would say, most of my hires have been great hires, but then there's been those hires that have not been great, and so we learn lessons by that. But we need to take the hiring process seriously because, it can have a very huge impact on your ministry. It can have a huge impact on the morale of your team. It can have a huge impact by making that mistake in the hiring process. So we just need to take it seriously. And another reason we need to take it seriously, I like what John Maxwell says, the closest to you will determine your level of success. And so as you begin hiring staff, maybe it's going to be first hiring part-time staff. Maybe it's going to be hiring your first full-time staff. Whereas you're expanding your staff, you get up to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 20 to 100, staff. It's the people who are closest to you will really help you develop your level of success. And I really agree with that. And so you got to be careful. You got to be careful with the people you're bringing around you. One of my prayers for the pastors I work with and the church planners I work with all the time is, Lord, get the right people around them. Get the right team around them. Get the right staff around them. Get the right lay leaders around them, because that's key for their own personal success and the success of our mission. So we're going to learn a couple things we want to talk about is just how do you spot, high achievers. And we're going to four things we'll look at there. And then we're going to walk you through a 12-step hiring process that I've used for years. If you want to get a written version of that, you could go to our Converge Mid-America website and look at under executive search or pastoral searches, and I outline it there in written form for you to take a look at. A lot of churches are using that process now as they're looking for staff and looking for senior leaders. So you can get more of a written detail there. But anyway, I want to look at this, how to spot high achievers. Number one, high achievers have to be found. I like this. Exceptional people are less accessible and are difficult to find. Eagles don't flock. You have to find them one at a time. I love that statement there. And so, it takes work. It takes work to find those high impact, high achieving leaders in your world. Number two, most churches don't attract high achievers. Just understanding that. And a couple things. Churches look for stability. They look for structure. They look for subordinates. They look at saving money, and they look at someone to shape. I was working with a team of leaders who had just dismissed their pastor, and just sad. And as we were talking about how they hired this person, how they made the decision to hire this person to bring them on their team, someone made the comment. They said, "Well, we knew we could help him become a better preacher." Well, that really what you need to look for is you need to find a better preacher and not think that you're going to shape people into becoming a better preacher. What do high achievers want? They want excitement. They want flexibility. They want partnerships. They want compensation. And they want to shape others, and they want to be able to shape the organization, and they want to have the freedom to do that. And so you can just see right there, there's a tension in that model, and this is one of the reasons why churches don't attract them, and they need to reposture themselves to attract high-achieving leaders. High achievers are expensive. Pat McMillan, in his excellent book, Hiring Excellence, said we're often too quick to settle for acceptable versus exceptional ones, and so sometimes we're always looking for that. We're always looking for that bargain. We're always looking for that. Here's one of the things I'll state, that there are no blue light specials in hiring staff. There are no blue light specials in hiring staff. You need to take the time, you need to invest in them and invest in there. And the other thing is that it's hard work. It's hard work to find exceptional leaders. It's hard work to find those impact players. And so we have to develop a process. And so today, big thing that you can take away today is that you're going to have a process here, a proven process for hiring your staff and your leaders as you move forward. So here's 4 questions that we talk about in hiring. For what do they look like? Okay, what does this candidate look like? And we'll go deeper into that. How do we find them? What do we do when they're in front of us? And then how do we make the decision? And so that's the big 4 overarching questions. And then within these 4 questions are where we have the work of hiring, the cycle, this 12-step process that we're going to work through. And so we're going to take and focus on each one of these areas during our time, and I think we can pause some time in each one of these for some Q&A. So first one is, what do they look like? What do these leaders look like? So a couple things. We talk about the preparing phase. And so how you prepare, part of it is preparing the church for this new hire. So a couple things. You gotta go, do we know where we're going? Is our vision, every time there's a transition, a leadership transition, I think it's always a good time to look at our vision. Are we articulating clearly where we're going, what we're doing, and where we're going? And the second one is strategy. Do we know how we're going to get there? It's all, go through it. Is our strategy working? And do we know how to achieve it? Do we have the resources? Are our resources aligned? Do we have the priorities set for this next hire? And are we willing to pay the price? Are we willing to get there? Or is there the commitment to get to the next level? I think that's really, really critical. So number one, you got to prepare your organization. You got to prepare your church, your ministry for this next hire, and going through asking these 4 questions will be a really helpful process for you. The second thing is planning. All right. So now we're going to hire this person. So I think the first thing you need to develop is develop a team. And this is one of the things that I really push on pastors is get a team of people around you to help you with the hiring process. And so find people. There are people in your churches who hire people, every week, and who've worked on hiring teams, who know all the interviewing processes and testing instruments, all those things that can be very helpful in it. And so I tell pastors all the time, don't do the hiring alone. Always work with a team. Get people to help you in that process. And then number 2, just engage in prayer. Make this a matter of prayer for the position that you're hiring. Right now, I'm in the process of looking for a new employee for a position in our organization, and I've been praying, for a couple months about God revealing who this person is going to be, and I got our prayer teams out there praying for this position. Share the vision with your leadership team, and the question, why are we hiring this person? And how does this person's role help fulfill our vision? We've entitled this thing, hiring, furthering your vision. The whole idea that this person's going to help you further your vision, take your vision farther in the process. And then overview the process. How are we going to do this? How are we going to work that and explain that to your team? And then the third thing under this question, what will they look like, is just profiling. And there's 2 key components in profiling: is developing a job description, and then describing the person, in writing. What type of person do you think best fits this role? And so let's first talk about just developing a job description. Job descriptions are really important. Good job descriptions empower leaders to lead through delegating responsibilities, not to just dumping duties on them. Okay, and so this whole concept is that a well-written job description will empower that person. It will cast a vision. It will empower them to do the job that you've called them to do. That job description will really describe how their role is going to further the mission and further the vision of the church or the ministry that God's called you to. It's just not delegating a bunch of checklists of duties, but it's more empowering them to fulfill the ministry. I love, Stephen Covey's book, just a profound book on my life, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about these 5 elements of good delegation, a desired result, guidelines, identifying parameters, what to do, what not to do, right? Resources, what resources are available, accountability, and then rewards and consequences. And I've just, years ago, I developed a bunch of job descriptions for our church because we grew to a size where we just needed more organization, and so I think I wrote like 100 job descriptions for our church, and I basically used this out as an outline, and just number 1, the desired result, kind of gave them a clear picture of how their role is going to impact the overall vision and mission of our organization. Guidelines, what not to do, what to do, right? Giving them parameters, resources. What do they have available to accomplish their job and accomplish the task? Accountability, where's the performance evaluation? How does that come in? Weekly reporting, quarterly evaluations, annual evaluations, and then rewards and consequences, identifying, hey, if you do your job, your impact is going to be this, is it's going to come out this way. But if you don't do your job, there's impact on that also. So when I put a job description together, I just use those big broad categories and develop those, and walk the person through them. So developing that job description is really, really important. And then next one is describing the person, a selection criteria. I think number one is biblical. When we see leaders being, in a sense, vetted in the New Testament, we see it in Acts chapter 1 where they basically had a process of determining who was going to be the leader that was going to replace Judas. In Acts chapter 6, we see again selection criteria of those leaders who were going to step in and solve the issue that was taking place in the church at that time. And then we see, just the qualifications of an elder and deacons in local churches. And so I think having a selection criteria is biblical and it's important, and we see that throughout Scripture. And then just practically, practically describing the person you want to work with, the person you think will fulfill this role. What are some things that are non-negotiable for you in this role? And from general things to specific things. And here's just a few that I think are really important. And as I begin looking at people, and then what you have to do is, as you look at these, sometimes you need to put these in order of importance, depending on the role that the person is going to have, right? So, number one, they have spiritual gravitas in the sense that they just, you just want what they have, right? I mean, you know that they're spiritually in tune, and there's something that's just attractive to them. They attract their spiritual life attracts you to them. They're people who take responsibility. They influence others positively. They add value to everything. To a meeting. You walk away and this person's added value. To that meeting, to your ministry, to your organization. They initiate. To me, it's really important that they initiate consistently, that's really important. Is for me in my role as I'm just running around here and there, and I need people to initiate with me and not be afraid to initiate with me consistently to get what they need from me. They seize opportunities, they empower others, they generate ideas, they have a servant's attitude, they go the second mile. They just they give that 110, 120%. They're not always kind of coming up short 70% on a project, but they're going that extra mile. They're going above and beyond the call of duty. They understand loyalty, and then they respect spiritual authority. They have a respect for spiritual authority. It's amazing to me, when you can get into an interview process and you're starting to talk to people and they start just talking bad about their previous employer or their previous, pastor or whatever. And just it always rubs me the wrong way that they're not showing respect, for spiritual authority. And I think that's just a profound spiritual principle that you need to look for in people's life. Because if they don't respect spiritual authority, right, there's going to be a time in your life where they're not going to respect your authority and as you work with them. So that kind of gives you the the first part. What do they look like? And taking time to describe that person, develop that job description is really critical. And having other people speak into it, I think is just very, very, very important. Any questions out there, Jonathan, as we...
Yeah, there's two of them that have popped in. Those other people that speak into the creation of the job description. Let's say you're in a small church and it's hard to put a team together. Where would you look outside of the church for input, outside of your local congregation for input?
Yeah. So, what I would do, number one, if you're in a fellowship of churches, in our office, we deal with HR issues all the time. And every week we talk to one of our 200 churches about HR issues. And so I would say if you're in a fellowship of churches, look in that direction would be number one. If you can't find help there, then I would look at maybe some other partnering churches that are near you, larger churches that can help you with some of those issues. I think those are a couple key things. And there's always people, coaches and consultants out there that can help you in this process also.
Yeah, I think that's a good. Those are all good observations. Now, the other question that's come up a couple of times in the course of this conversation is, what's the one big deal breaker? Hey, you had that list of characteristics on the previous slide. What would you say is the deal breaker characteristic, or the one that you absolutely have to have present in someone?
Yeah. Well, I think, I'm, a couple things. I mean, if we just, on the spiritual side of things, I would say this whole idea of spiritual authority and spiritual gravitas, I think that's really critical. How do they work? How do they work for people, right? And how they work for leaders, and I get this all the time. When pastors are having issues with their staff, and then we find out during the interview process they said something negative about their previous, pastor or employer. Well, first thing I tell them all the time is, if they talk that way, I wouldn't even hire them. That's it. I'm done. If they can't speak positively about the people they've worked for, and those people might have done them bad or hurt them in some way, I can understand that. But there's part of the issue is respect. I think spiritual authority is respecting the position. Maybe you don't respect the person, but you always will respect the position. And I think that's a critical issue. And then on a natural side of thing, for me, they take responsibility. They take responsibility. And they positively influence people around them. I mean, those are two raw components that I think that are just natural in leaders, and I think that are critical. So.
Okay, great thoughts.
Right. Okay. Well, let's move on now to talk about where do we find them, and there's three things that we're going to talk about under where do we find these candidates: gathering, networking, and recruiting. And so when we talk about gathering, we need to learn to kind of see potential, believe, and that's part of believing in people. That's the whole process of hiring from within, as you work with people and you start developing them and start, seeing them. I really like seeing people raised up out of the harvest, into ministry. And so, you got to see the potential, and part of that is just believing in people. And then remembering potential, collecting information. I've worked at, hired and mobilized over 100 some, pastors and church planters in the last 15 years. And so there's always a role, like right now I'm praying through the people in my life, who could fulfill a certain role that we're trying to fill. And so kind of remembering that potential, collecting information on people that you have, and then drawing it out. How do you create interest? How do you get people to respond? And getting the word out to your network, but how do you get people to apply for the position? So right now we're in the midst of hiring somebody in our office, and I sent out an email to people I personally know and said, hey, this position's open. And we've gotten three or four candidates that already from that process. So the higher level the position, the more resumes you need to gather. Okay. Typically for a senior pastor, when we're looking for a senior pastor, helping a church place a senior pastor, we're going to get 200 to 250 resumes for that church, and then basically we go down, break that down to 25, and then really look close at those 25 and break that down to top 10, and go through another phase and get down to the top 5. But the higher the level, the position, the more candidates you need to have. So gathering is really important, and so ways you gather people is by raising them up in your church, is by remembering people in your life, and then drawing it out. How do you get people to apply? And there's all sorts of websites out there now that have free sites. There's some you have to pay subscription for, and we use them all. Typically, when we're looking for a senior pastor, we have like 18 seminaries that we put jobs out on their job boards. All those kind of things that create that interest out there to get people to apply. And another thing I'd say under creating interest is just writing a good ad. And one of the things that I've seen work over my 15 years of doing this is to have some type of question, because I think questions seem to stick in people's hearts. And so one question I used for years recruiting church planners do you have a constructive spirit of discontent? And we just get hundreds, and thousands over the years of people who would respond to that. And but that was a question we used to draw interest into our positions that we had available. The other one is just networking, right? And how do you work your relationships, knowing people who know people. And so we have another position available, and for a senior pastor role. And so I have a network of people that I'm going to send out this job opportunity to, and because a number of people who know people, and we'll get the word out to different people. So get into the leadership flow. What that means, again, find leaders who attract leaders, and who are empowering leaders, who have a reputation for empowering leaders, is really, really critical. And then the other thing on networking is you got to act on the leads. If you want to get more leads, you need to respond to the leads that people give you. And so if someone sends me an email saying, "Hey, Gary, I saw this position. I think this guy would be really good for it," number one, I'm going to act on that. I'm going to, first of all, thank them for the lead, and then I'm going to call that person personally and respond in a very personal way. Because in a sense, you're honoring the person who's giving you the lead. They don't have to give you that lead. And so you got to figure out how to honor them by acting on it right away. So that's part of the networking piece. And then recruiting. When you're recruiting someone to a job or position, always recruit to the vision. Again, preparing yourselves, going over your vision statements, have a clear, concise vision statement, know and how, and then how does that job fulfill that vision and further the vision. I always invite people, to prayerfully consider this and ask the question: Is God calling you to this? Is God calling you to this situation? I think in recruiting, you got to change your posture. You got to be more of that servant leader. I think some people in recruiting, sometimes they come off as kind of guarding the position and not drawing people out more. Learning how to do that, and then don't oversell. If you oversell, you're just going to get in trouble all the time. And then creating responsibility is kind of creating responsibility on their end, and asking them to pray about it, asking maybe casting a vision to them why you feel that this would be a good opportunity for them, a good role for them to step into. But then ask them to pray about it. Ask them to pray about with their spouse and their family, and have them really sense the call of God. I've asked people, I'd say, I just want you to go pray about this for the next 2 weeks, then I'm going to follow up with you. And I'll see. It'll be interesting to see. I always find it interesting when they come back, if they've really prayed about it or not. If they haven't prayed about it, then they're really not serious. And I typically move on at that point. If they come back, well, I've been busy, haven't really thought much about it. But if they come back saying, I've been praying about this every day, and God's really stirring in my heart about this position, well, then there's something that I can work with something there. So, any questions, comments on when we talk about how to find them?
Yeah, walk through the distinctions of gathering, networking, and recruiting a little bit more carefully, because I think there's a little bit of confusion from folks about how those are different.
Okay. Well, gathering is just really getting people to apply, right? And you're getting data from them. You're getting applicants to apply. That's really the big thing. And then networking is just working your relationships of people that you have that can then help you gather more resumes. And then recruiting is where they're not applying, you're actually going to them, asking them to apply. And you're saying, boy, I really believe that you would be good in this role, and I really love you to consider applying for it.
Okay.
So.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. I think that was the main thing is the terms ran together just a little bit. So I appreciate you clarifying that.
Yeah, they're all nuances. I mean, the big thing is you want to get as many applicants as you can, and there's different ways of doing it, right? So from posting an ad on a job site, from sending out emails and to key leaders, to actually you physically going and recruiting someone to the role or position. So,
what's a place to look for candidates that is effective but isn't something that people think of all the time?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, when I'm looking for a candidate, the first thing I'm always thinking about hiring from within, right? And so I'm looking at people, I'm developing, whether in my ministry or in my sphere of influence. So I'm always looking in that. That's the first thing I look for. And basically, I start that off just by praying and saying, God, reveal, a person to me. And I've had God wake me up with person's name, and I remember calling, a gentleman the next day, after I woke up, and it was like the Lord said, call this guy. And so I called him, and he was open. Because the God had been working in him. And so I think there's that whole spiritual element there of just, really seeking God's direction and guidance and empowerment to see this happen. And so, I never want to overshadow the whole prayer aspect of things here. And so I think that's really critical.
Okay.
And then, again, there's, like I said, there's all sorts of job sites, ministry job sites out there now. There are, whatever seminaries and Bible schools you can, you can partner with, getting that information out to them. So, the internet is crazy, posting it on your, I think every church should have employment opportunities. You look at most of the major large churches will have a section on their website about employment opportunities. One of the things we have on our website for our churches is, we have a job board. And so we just want to keep that out there all the time and provide those resources for people. So looking that way through Facebook, all sorts. Just it's amazing how through the social networking it's amazing how that takes off. So.
Okay, great thoughts.
All right. Okay. So now let's talk about what do you do when they're in front of you. So interviewing, we're going to talk about interviewing, referencing, and kind of assessing the candidates. Interviewing, basically there's kind of three primary interviews. There's a phone interview, which is more of like kind of screening the candidates, and then there's a first interview where you're really talking more about their competency and their compatibility with your ministry and the chemistry with them personally. And then there's the second interview, which is more in depth, talking about going into more character issues, their Christian walk and their calling. And so that's kind of the process that we work for. So when, let's say we're going through and we just had wrapped one of these up for one of our churches, and their pastor is just starting this week. And so we went through a whole process of getting 200 resumes, and we screened those resumes down based on the criteria we developed. And then in this case, because preaching was such a big component of it and communication, we basically narrowed it down to about 25 people. We listened to 25 individual sermons from each candidate, and then out of that we took the strongest communicators and broke it down to 10. And then from those 10, we did a phone interview. And I would, one of the things we're to talk about the interview process is having written questions down. So we do a 1-hour interview, and then we have 25 pretty rapid questions that we ask the individual, and then we would move into the, from there we'd get the top 5, and then we go into the next level of interviewing. So just kind of get that. Number one interviewing mistake is just being unprepared for the interview, having no criteria, having no questions. Having questions not related to the criteria, ineffective note-taking. You've got to be this is why you need a team around you. You got to have people who are people who are going to ask the questions, and you have people who are just going to take notes. And you need people who are taking those notes. They're gauging the responses to the questions. One of the things in interviewing is just too much talking. The interviewer's doing too much talking. And this is where you need to ask a lot of open-ended questions and let them talk. And then making assumptions too quickly, I think, is another thing that happens in the interviewing process. And so that can really be hurtful to that process. Here's just an example of a good interviewing questions. And so one of the criteria for this job was they wanted somebody who's going to make something happen, right? And they're going to be a person who's going to take responsibility, take charge, and they're going to make sure that the task that they're given is going to be fulfilled to the best of their ability. So how do you find that out about a person? Well, here's a couple questions. Tell us about some of your proudest accomplishments in your current job. Get people to talk about their accomplishments. Can they talk about them in a positive way, or are they and just in a very sober-minded way, I think, as Scripture would say. Can they talk about them in that way? And then describe a time when you were faced with limited resources and you still got the job done. Again, they made it happen, right? They took responsibility. They said, as far as it's up to me, I'm going to make this task happen. And they worked it through. And so getting people to talk about that stuff is really important. But you can see now how, and if you had a criteria of 10 things, it positively influences others. You develop questions under those categories to get the individual talking. And then referencing, what do you do, in referencing people? And just a couple rules here on referencing. Number one is the higher the position, the more referencing is needed. And some people practice a 3 deep rule, and in some cases even it's even a higher level referencing than that. But typically in referencing, I want to hear from someone they were a subordinate to, whether that was a person on their board, if they were a senior pastor, or whether they're senior pastor, if they were an associate pastor. But I want somebody that they were a subordinate to. I want somebody they were a peer of, and then someone who worked for them in the referencing process. In referencing, again, always ask open-ended questions. Get the people talking about the person. And again, take good notes and check out the facts and develop questions based on the criteria. Again, this is why you need a good criteria of describing this person. And so we'll give you another example of here on the criteria is making things happen, right? And this person takes responsibility; they can make things happen. So here's some of the reference questions. How would you describe their energy level? What project would have not happened, without them? Get someone talking about them. If a superior says, "Oh boy, man, they just made this happen. They got this done. There were a lot of obstacles they were facing, and they overcame them." That's a good route. Get them talking about that, and you can start seeing if this person fits the criteria that you want to see happen in the job. So, again, going back, referencing, the higher the position, the more referencing is needed. Always try to get those open-ended questions, getting them talking about the people and taking good notes is critical. And then assessing, that's more of assessing some of their a lot of this spirit, their temperament and personality tests. And so here's a couple that we use, and through Strategic Team Makers, it's a really interesting study, this job perceptions inventory. It's basically where the person who's hiring takes this test, does this testing tool, and says, here's the type of person I think we need to get this job done for this position. And then you actually have the applicant, fill it out, and then you see if you're on the same page or not. And so that's a great tool in developing that. And then the portrait predictor is really more the DISC test and things like that. But you've got to find what are some of these, what type of testings are you going to use, and then what type of personality fits that job the best way. So, all right.
How about a core question at this juncture here, Gary? Twice this has been asked. Second time from Jason. Is there a general list of top positions that you have to have in a church culture? What should the organization look like at the top, generally speaking?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the top, again, it all depends on the size of a church, right? And so these are one of the things on my blog, and maybe Jonathan, you can find this. If you go on GaryRohrmeyer.com, you can find my blog. I've got a paper that a guy wrote on staffing in a church, and he actually goes through the whole list of how many staff do you need for a different size church. And the old rule of thumb was, one full-time staff person for 150 people, and so that was a critical thing. One of the things that happens is that we live in this world where most of the speakers who are speaking at conferences are leading very large churches, and that's great. And the primary thing that they deal with all the time is staffing issues. When you're that large, you're dealing with staffing all the time. But what happens is I think it's over communicated for the person who's in a smaller church. And so all they're thinking is, oh, for me to get to the next level, I need a staff person, right? For me to get from 150 to 250, I need to hire a full-time staff person. It's not necessarily true. You might not need a full-time person. Maybe you need a part-time person. And so the whole idea of having, as you get larger, you're going to have more people who are going to be specialists. When you're smaller, you need generalists.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so people who can do multiple jobs and who can affect people in multiple ways. And so I think that's a critical issue. So, when you're, if you want to get over the 800 mark, if you're in the 500, 600, 800 mark, you're going to need 5 or 6, staff, and you're going to need, number one, the lead pastor. You're going to need a worship person. You're going to need someone full-time in children's ministry. You can need somebody full-time in assimilation, all those areas in moving the church forward. In a church plant, when I tell guys, when they're out there planting and they have a team, they're pulling a team together, I basically say there's, whether they're volunteer or whether they're, on staff, part-time or full-time, you need, 3 things if you're going to have a growing church plant. You need a worship person, someone who's going to really give leadership to developing the best worship experience on Sunday morning, and you're going to need a children's a leader, a director, who is basically going to make sure that kids are being ministered to and that leaders and teachers are being mobilized and encouraged in that ministry. And so I basically say I wouldn't start a church today without at least some really solid volunteers or part-time staff in those three areas. So.
Yeah, great thoughts. And I just put the link into the chat area. The book you're talking about is the Church Growth Ratio book by Win Arn, and that walks through some of those details. And I will tell you that I just went to GaryRohrmeyer.com and put in church size, and first thing that came up. So it's really easy to use, and you can find anything you need right there just by going.
And if you put in staffing, you might find there's another document in there on church staffing too.
Okay.
Another white paper that another gentleman wrote. So it'll be helpful.
I'm gonna pull that one up here momentarily as well. So
okay.
You'll see that in the chat area here. Church staffing.
Yeah, one of the issues I think that some churches are dealing with is they want, some pastors want an executive pastor right away, and I think that's, typically you're looking at to have a true what I would call executive pastor. You're really looking at the 1,000 mark, and whereas probably the churches that are under 1,000 they're more what I would say administrative pastors, right, or office managers. So that's one of the issues I think that pastors need to deal with all the time. So, let's move on and talk about how to make the decision. So tracking, evaluating, calling. And I'm just going to run through the different. Tracking is just keeping a running scorecard of the candidates, having all the data at your fingertips, having, if you've sent out a questionnaire to them, have that questionnaire available, have their resume available, have their references available, all background checks available, all that stuff will be really important. To have it at your fingertips and making those decisions. When we're working with a church, we give a church 5. What I believe, our goal is to give them 5 candidates that we believe all 5 could be their pastor, and or fulfill that ministry role, whatever it is. And then we work with them we give them all the data on those people. And we basically tell them we want you to read everything about them. We want you to generate questions about the person, and then we help them develop and go from the 5 to 3, and then move there to the next level. Again, note taking is going to be real important at this stage, and so you want to make sure you got good note takers on your team and detailed people that can keep track of all that stuff. And then evaluating, how do you make your decision? Here's 6 questions Pat McMillan came up with out of his book, Hiring Excellence. Does the job fit them? Competency. Do they fit the job? Compatibility. Do they fit the organization? Chemistry. Can we afford them? Compensation. Can we trust them? Character. Do we see Jesus in them? Their Christian walk, and why do they want to work here? Are they being called to this situation, to this opportunity that we have available here? And so those are great questions in helping you make the decision and walk through those things. And if you can't trust, if you can't trust a person, don't hire them, right? If there's anything in their life that says, boy, I don't know if I trust this person, just, I think that's, you got to kind of go with your gut on these things, and maybe the Spirit's protecting you from something, but you've got to flesh that out. And maybe if you have a team and there's people on the team that say, I don't know if I trust that person, then you really got to work that through and flesh that out and see if there's merit to their question and to their level of distrust. I think it's really critical. So, and then 12, just calling. If you're going to call somebody to the position, do it in writing, a clear outline of compensation and benefits, organizational chart, include a job description, send out announcements to the right people. Depending on the level again of this role, have some type of installation service. Make it important. To them, to the church, and then the other thing I like to say is you got to pave the way. Sometimes as a senior leader, you got to pave the way for them with certain people, or you just need to let them go and get out of their way, and let them start doing the role that you've called them to. So, and then we'll just wrap it up with these 4, what I call 4 big mistakes in hiring. Number 1, no clear picture. We talked about that. No clear process. And so we wanted to give you today, what we're giving you here is a clear process, a 12-step process of how to do your hiring, make your hiring decisions, and then not enough candidates. People just don't get enough candidates for a role. And the higher the profile role, the more candidates you need to look at. And then just not enough prayer. I love what we find in Luke's gospel. Jesus went out and prayed, and he spent all night in prayer. And then the next day he came and he called his disciples, and he chose the 12 out of that time in prayer with the Lord. And I think we just need to bathe this whole process in prayer and ask God to not only protect the church, but also protect the individual that we're trying to hire, that this would be a win for them. Because too many of us have seen, bad hires, right? And they've hurt not only the church, the ministry, but it also probably have hurt the family of the people who came and served. And so it has a big impact on people. And so we just need to bathe this whole situation in prayer. Well, we can go to some more Q&A and.
All right, give some ideas about the kinds of prayers people pray for selection, for finding that new staff person.
Yeah. Well, I said earlier, one of the prayers I pray is, Lord, reveal to me in my background somebody who could fit this role. All right, that's kind of that prayer of just asking God to, there's got to be somebody in my life, who would fit this role. and someone in my sphere of influence that would fit this role or this opportunity. And so I think that's part of it. I think the other thing was just praying, for someone, not only that God would reveal someone to us, but praying that someone, for someone, through the criteria, you want somebody who has a passion for God, a passion for lost people, a love for the church, a burden for the community, a person whose heart's broken, for lost people, someone who has that synergistic vision to work with you and seeing this move forward. So, if it's a worship person, praying for someone that they'll not only be a great artist, and a great, a person who can engage people in the presence of God, but also they be a person who's good at develop other people, develop artists, develop worship leaders, and really reinforce the vision of our church. It's a children's director, praying for someone who just loves seeing other people succeed, right? And taking people and turning them into teachers, into loving kids, and having a passion to teach kids the wonderful truths of God's Word. So I think again, you pray that criteria and ask God to reveal that person.
What are the 2 or 3 habits that churches that are hiring probably already have that they absolutely should hold on to?
Well, I think if you in some churches they have their structures. They got to have a team. I think it's important to have a team in place. Some churches will have they'll basically one mistake I see is where they have they got to have a representative type of team, representing different pockets of the church. I'm not a big fan of that, and I'm more of a fan of finding people who have hiring experience and who have wisdom and insight and discernment into people's lives. That's more critical to me than just having someone who's representing a certain population of the local church. So we're encouraging churches to kind of change that now if they have that type of work in their bylaws. But I think having a team is really, really important. So.
Okay.
And most churches do, but they don't use it effectively. That's the.
This is the number one thing that has come up in the chat area, and I've been saving this till now.
Okay.
What is the best advice you can give about establishing realistic compensation for staff positions?
Mm-hmm. Well, the best advice is comparing the data out there. There is a compensation handbook that we have in our office that we use for our churches that you can it gives you all the current data. The new one just came out for 2014, and so basically going by that. The other thing is establishing it based on experience, right? This education, all those things, and then my the other thought is that this is part of where you get a sense of a person's calling, right?
Mm.
Because the bottom line is we could all go make more money somewhere else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there is a calling. There is a part of understanding that if we are in a for-profit market, and we could be making a lot more money with the talents and gifts that God's given us. And so I think there's just embracing that and understanding that is important. But I think if money is going to be an issue, you've got to, if you really want the person, you believe the person is going to do it, then figure out a way to pay them, because they're going to be, don't go on the cheap side of things. But yeah, so there's data out there, and you can get that. There's an annual compensation manual for church jobs, every level, bookkeeper, children's minister, all that stuff. And so that's a great criteria to base it on and work from there.
Okay, annual compensation manual for church jobs. I'm just throwing that into Google here. Oh, there it is. I'm going to I just put in the chat area what you should copy and drop into Google. It comes right up. There's a couple of different options, actually, it looks like. That would be a great source of data, of info about how to compensate appropriately the people in your congregation. Oh yeah, a whole bunch of them. A whole bunch of possibilities depending on your tradition and your denomination.
Right.
All right. What one last piece of advice? We'll kind of use this as your final thought. But what last piece of advice would you have for a leader in a local congregation that wants to make the most of their next hiring opportunity?
Yeah. Well, again, I can never underestimate the prayer, right? Aspect of prayer. And I use this quote from A.T. Pierson. He said, "Every step in the progress of missions is directly traceable to prayer. It has been the preparation of every new triumph and the secret of all successes." And so just, number one, make this a matter of prayer. And ask God to reveal and who this person is going to be, and just and then work the process. I like one of my heroes is Vince Lombardi, and Vince Lombardi's father had tattoos on his fingers, and he had a tattoo on his one hand that basically on each finger it said work, and the other one said play. And so I think about that, those two hands, right? And he had work and play. And I think for Christians, we need to work and pray. And so we work like it's up to us, and we pray like it's up to God. And that combination in it. And then part of it is just, we make a decision when we hire somebody. We make a decision in faith. And I've heard large church pastors say, we do all work, and then we just kind of hold our breath, for 2 years to see if the decision works out, because as you hire more, you get more experience, right, in that process. And when I went from hiring one full-time person every other year in our church ministry to now we're hiring full-time people all the time for pastors and churches and church planting. And so you just get better at doing it more, and that's why you got to have that team around you to help you. People who are hiring people on a regular basis, it's really critical.
All right, those are great thoughts. It was a great hour that we spent diving into some of these ideas. If you do want to talk about personal coaching, that's how to get a hold of me, or you can send a question to me if you have one for Gary that we didn't get to today. Be happy to pass those on to him to get things moving forward. I do want to mention that there is new training opportunities from CoachNet starting tomorrow. So you can check that out at coachnet.org. If you go over to the Shop CoachNet tab on the website, you'll see some great opportunities there starting tomorrow. Some new ideas for moving forward. And of course, Gary's book, Spiritual Conversations, is one of the, in fact, if you don't mind me saying this, in my opinion, this is some of Gary's best work. Practical, tangible ideas about how to dive into spiritual conversations that really make a difference with the people around you. You can find those at yourjourneyresources.com. All right, I'm going to offer a word of prayer, and then we'll wrap up this month's Sharper Edge Leadership Series webinar. The next episode is a month and 4 days from now, Tuesday, February 11th is when we're going to have the next episode of the Sharper Edge Leadership Series. Looking forward to seeing you in the training room for that conversation, and looking forward to hearing more about what Gary will challenge us with next month. So let's wrap up for today with a word of prayer. Jesus, we just say thanks for the conversation and for the challenge that you put in front of us. We say thank you that you are willing to meet us where we are and to stretch us into a new reality, a new direction. Thanks for your generosity. Thanks for your willingness to pour into us. And thanks for framing out through Gary's words, Gary's work, how we can make the maximum impact in shaping our organizations by adding new people to the mission and vision that you're calling us to. Be glorified through it all, Lord Jesus. And we pray this in your holy and precious name. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thanks, Jonathan.
You bet, Gary. Thanks to you, and we'll talk to you next month.
All right. God bless.